Thank you all for tuning in today to this conversation. We're speaking about shifting the silence around miscarriages. And of course, this is a much needed conversation, especially in this month of October, which is the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And we are having this conversation as well for Fertility Show Africa. So to start off, I'll introduce myself and then Dr. Jess, and we'll get into this conversation. So to start off, I am Ola of Fertility Conversations, and I live in Nigeria. I've experienced 4 pregnancy losses, and at the time, people that came to see me or speak to me about it would often say for me to quickly move on and try to get pregnant again and hopefully have a child. And as much as we're saying that to me, and I could understand perhaps where they were coming from, I was also dealing with a lot of grief and pain, but no one else around me seemed to have an understanding of what I was going through. So I went on the internet to try to find anyone that understood. And luckily, I found a lot of forums and connected with other women. And it just made me feel like my feelings were valid. Like what I was feeling was okay to feel. I didn't need to rush the process. And so from that support that I got, I then decided to start fertility conversations to hopefully encourage others to speak and for us to support each other. Because again, from the statistics, it says 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a loss, yet no one around me seemed to want to speak about it or even seem to understand what it was about. So that's a brief about me and why I now speak about this. So over to you, Dr. Jess.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that we connected and that we are part of this conference together. And I really appreciate you sharing your story. So my name is Dr. Jessica Zucker. I'm a Los Angeles-based psychologist, and I specialize in reproductive and maternal mental health, and have done so for over a decade at this point. So kind of the interesting thing about my background is that I specialized in this before undergoing a miscarriage firsthand. And I have a background in public health, so I worked internationally prior to pursuing my PhD, and focused on women's rights and women's reproductive health beforehand. And so it's been next month will be 9 years since I had a second trimester miscarriage while I was home by myself. My first pregnancy was smooth and uneventful. And so going into my second pregnancy, although of course I was aware of the statistics and I had patients telling me about the pain and the grief of pregnancy and infant loss, I don't know. I guess we all sort of have to have some hardy denial when we go into trying to get pregnant. We just have to hope for the best and think that we will be the, exception to these statistics, that we will not end up having to go through this roller coaster of emotion that people have been reporting for so long. And I just did not feel well in this second pregnancy. And, but everyone was saying, well, you've made it to the second trimester, things, should be fine. And we can get into the details of my miscarriage later if we want to. They're very gory and dramatic. But suffice it to say that, having a second trimester miscarriage while home by myself really shifted my professional life and, of course, my personal life as well. So ever since my loss, I have begun, writing even more about this topic. I had already written on the topic, but now it was, of course, infused with this very personal, intense feeling of knowing grief firsthand. It's one thing to read all the books about it. It's another thing to be, professionally sort of up on research and stats and stuff, but it's completely other world to have gone through it yourself and to experience the postpartum hormones without having a baby. And so this book Oh, you can't really see it. Well, anyway, this book came out in March of this year. And this is sort of a culmination of all my writing and my experience. So it's a memoir, but it's also a manifesto. So I really get into the ways in which I think we need culture to change once and for all when it comes to the silent stigma and shame that surrounds this topic.
Yes. That's an excellent book anyway, for anyone that hasn't read it. I think that is a must read.
So glad I'm so glad that it was meaningful to you. Yeah.
Yes. And you also having that campaign, I Had a Miscarriage, to again raise awareness about it, because it is very important.
Yes, right. So let's see, in 2014, I wrote a piece where I was holding a sign that said, I had a miscarriage. And that ran in the New York Times. And it was like very important for me to kind of invite people in. Like, my hope was to galvanize a global conversation so people all over the world could see this and think to themselves, wow, why is there shame? Why have I been silent? Maybe I could just be honest and open and say I had a miscarriage or not, so in no way do I expect that everyone will want to be this transparent or this open about their stories, but I wanted to at least create a space where people could if they wanted to. And so, yeah, I eventually took to Instagram and created this community because I really felt like, it was time for us to feel a sense of support, but also to be able to read through stories and feel aligned, like be able to read other people's situations and feelings and experiences and say, oh, I'm actually not alone. Because you read these articles, you're not alone, 1 in 4, all this stuff. But it's so different to actually feel not alone. Yeah, so that was really the aim with building that community.
That was amazing. Just to be able to gain to see that someone out there like yourself and so many other women are saying that and sharing their stories, very important. Because even for me, when I had that experience, I'm sure people I met probably some of them had miscarriages, but no one wanted to speak about it at all. Because again, there is some shame. There's a lot of shame attached to it. Because as much as, I knew I didn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, some people told me that I did, because, people feel like when you get pregnant, they will tell you, make sure you get lots of rest, don't work too hard, eat the right foods, and, all this lifestyle things that you should do. So when something goes wrong, it's almost like you start to question yourself, what part of it didn't I do right? Did I not rest enough?
And that's the thing that's kind of troubling and baffling and kind of crazy making, because it makes personal an aspect of our lives that isn't personal. It's out of our control, because, the research has found that a majority of miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities. So how would rest save us from a miscarriage? It just can't. Or how could, eating not well or not right or not drinking enough water or these things contribute to a miscarriage? They can't. So I think that, we get kind of lost in thinking that somehow it's a fault of our own, because I think it's us grasping at having control. And I think, though, that this, self-blame and the shame and the stigma are really, ways for us to kind of hope that we could affect change and that we could create a different outcome if only we had done X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. That's not the truth, like you said. But people need to know that, because you don't know that, right? So because when you're not even aware, when no one is talking about it, then you don't actually realize that you couldn't have changed this would have happened regardless of what you did.
I know, and I wonder why our minds go there. right? And why culture participates in that, or why our families can even say stuff that trigger us and make us think it's somehow our fault.
Yeah.
Right. So if I think it's a combination of like misinformation and also maybe, again, these sort of old wives' tales, for lack of a better phrase, about sort of what things mean or how much impact we can have on the outcome of a pregnancy. When the truth of the matter is, for better and for worse, pregnancy loss is a normative outcome of pregnancy. It's fraught, it's sad, it's, can be horribly traumatic, but it is normal.
It is. And I think, again, just like you said, it can really impact your mental health. And it did really impact mine, which again is another reason why people need to speak about it, because if you need help, then you need to find the help that you need. I dealt with a lot of PTSD for a very long time. I kept on having nightmares and flashbacks. I dealt with a lot of anxiety. I had to actually see those. I had to see just as well at some point, because it started to actually manifest in the physical sense. It was no longer just in my mind. It was now pain in my feelings all around, where people had to actually start investigating if there was actually another problem. But then we got to realize that it was anxiety that was now manifesting in the physical form, which again is another reason why this needs to be dealt with. You need to have the conversations and get the help that you need. And there's nothing wrong with getting help.
Yes. Where are you at with that? So through getting help and really attending to your mental health, do you feel like you've landed in a much better place? Like you're not carrying those feelings in the same way anymore?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
So how did you know that you needed help? Because I think this gets us into a very important part of the conversation that's not talked about, right? Which is how do we know? What's that moment when we decide, you know what, this is harmful, I am really struggling, and I need to turn to professional help or something more than just, the internet, to feel like I'm addressing what I've gone through, the grief, the PTSD, these things. How did you know it was time?
I think in my case, because it actually became physical, everything else before that, I was telling myself, okay, again, when I speak to other people and they say, well, somebody else had, I don't know, 8 losses and they were able to then have a kid afterwards, and, they're fine now. They have 2 kids now. They have 3 children now. So it's almost like, I'm not sure how much you really dealt with. It's not that much. It could be worse. And if someone else could still move on after that, then, there's no reason why you shouldn't. So because of that, I kept on trying to help myself and just, try to stay positive and believe that it's going to happen. But then I started actually feeling pain in my body, and I could feel the heat passing through my body in actual sense. This wasn't just in my mind. Wow. So I actually thought I was having like maybe an autoimmune disease. So I started doing a lot of research. I went to doctors, then referred to to a neurologist in the UK. So I actually had to travel, and I did a lot of testing before they then finding out that this was anxiety and I wasn't actually breathing properly, that I actually also needed to take classes on how to breathe properly, because it was just obvious that I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and I didn't know that, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, so as you were talking, I just realized how important this kind of idea, like that you were saying in the beginning, like, maybe if you remain positive, or if you focus on like, oh, how much harder other people have had it, it gets us into some of the things that people say after you've had a loss or several losses. And these phrases that begin with at least you have a healthy child, or at least you're in a happy marriage, or you have a thriving career, or at least. And these things that sort of like minimize the depth of our pain and the enormity of our fear as we're traversing, this process. And so, we can internalize how much people do this and then do it to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's interesting what you're saying, that it had to kind of become physical for you to take it more seriously, right? You were trying so hard to just kind of get through it on your own.
Yeah. Or at least this happened early as well. Because again, people would say to me, well, it wasn't like you were really, really obvious, so you could keep it quiet. No one knew about it, right? So it would have been worse if you were like 8 months and then, you're already getting ready for the baby to come anyway, so this was early. It's not such a big deal. But then people don't realize that for people that want the pregnancy, there's a lot of hopes and dreams attached to that potential baby that was about to come. So you losing that baby is loss of all of that hope and dreams. When I still see children on the streets that will be in the similar ages of the children that I could have had, I still remember and say, hey, if those kids were here, they'll be 5 now or 6 or whatever the case might be. So it's not just as easy as, just get on with it.
Not at all. Not at all. And I think from the outside, it is because no one met this potential baby or no one, but I think what you're saying, like, as soon as we get a positive pregnancy test, we begin to imagine this life that we want, or this, expanded family. And so the loss of that is not just the loss of this, the tissue or the fetus. It's really, about this bigger world that we envisioned. And you talking about this also made me think about something we've spoken about before, which I think is important for us to bring up right now, which is this idea that grief is grief and love is love, right? And so you could be, 5 weeks pregnant, you could be 15 weeks pregnant, you could be 40 weeks pregnant. It doesn't behoove us to compare and contrast our losses or who is, hurting more. And I get into that in my book. It's sort of like, what are we doing? Like, we're competing for who's the most traumatized. That doesn't do any of us any good. And I think, of course, all of our grief is unique, right? So somebody who did have, an early loss versus a stillbirth, I mean, their feelings will probably be very different, but it doesn't mean they're not entitled to the feelings that they have. And for them to be judged by the outside or minimized from other people is just tragic and unnecessary.
Yeah. And, again, talking about losses and how it impacts future pregnancies. I wonder, in your case, experiencing that loss and then going on to get pregnant again.
Oh, yes.
That could really be a lot.
Right. Yes, I forgot to mention that in the introduction, which is that I went on to get pregnant with my healthy daughter a few months after my loss. And so for me, for us, we were at an age where it felt like time was not on our side, like that it was now or never if we wanted to try again. And so we did. And, I don't have regrets necessarily, of course, because I have her, but I did not have enough time to process what I had been through. And then within that sort of subsequent pregnancy, I was holding my breath the whole time. And it wasn't until she was born healthy, and I talk about this in the book, like, I think I thought that I would have this extended exhale once she arrived. And I did for a moment until I didn't, which was like 2 seconds later, I realized like, oh, wait, now I'm going to worry about, her breathing and her day-to-day and all of these things. And so I eventually, like you, became pretty concerned about my own mental health. I mean, it was actually not for a number of months. And I think it was that became complicated for me because I was breastfeeding, and I was worried that if I started taking medication while I was breastfeeding, that would create problems. But yeah, I mean, I realized later just how much grief I had tucked in and how much trauma I had pushed down in order to get through this next pregnancy. And it all sort of erupted once I finally had this, family that I wanted. It was like, well, wow, so much happened en route to getting here. And so I think that is so important, this idea that all of these people walking around pregnant after pregnancy loss, or even these families that we see that we think, oh, they're so lucky and they probably got there unscathed. You know what? We have no idea. And given statistics, we're probably wrong. So if 1 in 4, pregnancies result in miscarriage, and 1 in, I think it's 160 in stillbirth, and people terminate for medical reasons, 1 in 8 have fertility struggles, all of these statistics let us know that even these families, including my own, when people see us out and about, they might think like, wow, how lucky she is. They don't know what I've been through. So I think it's important that we don't assume that everybody else was lucky and somehow we're unlucky, because I think we have more in common with people than we realize,
Yeah. I think it's important that we seek that help and pray at the same time. It's not one or the other, because some people, have those beliefs that you just need to pray, and that's great, but it's also important to seek help.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was actually just going to ask you about, because we had talked about that previously. It seems like culturally, some people can get caught in thinking like, if I just believe harder, or if I pray more frequently, or if I go to temple or church or whatever more, and my belief is stronger, then I can get through anything. And you bring up such an important point that, some things are not solely based on that our bodies are doing things, and that there are, medical reasons for these experiences sometimes.
Yeah.
And
so in terms of like summarizing a conversation and, just encouraging, like, that's been your big campaign, that's your book. You've done so much in encouraging these conversations.
I'll show people again.
Yes.
And because you found that my book was available in different parts of Africa, right?
Yes, exactly. It is as well. I believe on Kobo as well, which is a site like Amazon you can buy. But so it is available. And I think it's important that people.
There's an audio book as well that I narrated. So if people would prefer to listen to it, that's available as well.
Yeah, and that's on Amazon, the audiobook?
Yes, it's through Penguin Random House, but yes, it's on Amazon. Yes.
Okay. All right, that's perfect. So then people can listen. I think it's important that you listen and look at your campaigns as well. The videos where you showed off different women speaking about the losses. Did you want to speak about that campaign and how that came to be?
Well, the two of us have to do that together, by the way. I know we talked about it, but we haven't found the time. We will. Yeah, I mean, so the campaign, like I mentioned before, started in 2014, and I really didn't know that I was starting anything, honestly. I mean, I just wanted to kind of do my part in destigmatizing the issue, so that my New York Times piece with the I Had a Miscarriage sign. And then the following year, for Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, I decided to create a line of pregnancy and infant loss cards. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yeah.
And so every year since, I've tried to address different aspects of pregnancy and infant loss and life after. And so, yes, I've tried to galvanize groups of women to come together to kind of, show how diverse this is and how we're all affected no matter, where we come from.
Yeah.
And that, like I mentioned before, we can have this beautiful family and still have pain from the past. And I think it's important that more people talk about that.
Yes, very important. So in us, it's been great having this conversation with you here today, Dr. Jess. I think it's very important. And who else to have a conversation like this than you, who's done a whole lot
You.
research, research, reading a book, campaigns, cards. Really amazing that you did the cards, because I think it's important to have the right cards saying the right words, and not just those generic cards.
Platitude.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. The things that hurt more than help. We don't need any more of that.
exactly, exactly. So as a wrap up and just summarizing what you like people, the topic of our conversation today was shifting the silence around miscarriages. So I wonder, what would you like to just leave people with on a final note?
I mean, it sounds cliche, but I really want people to understand that they're not alone, and that, talking out loud about pain does not keep you stuck in it. It does not mean that your life, is somehow going to be miserable forever. I think that when we understand that we can talk about our experiences, we feel less alone, we feel more connected, and we honor the pregnancies that we've lost. So it's not just about honoring what we're going through, but it's really showing other people that this meant something. And yeah, so I think sharing our stories can be revolutionary. And I think it doesn't mean that we all have to, but if people want to, they should use their voices and come to understand that they're not alone.
Very important. Thank you so much, Dr. Jess. And and you mentioned remembering what has been lost, and that's why I love the Wave of Light. I believe it's usually around October 15th, where you light a candle and just remember babies that have been lost. On a final note, I would just like to say that I think it's important to, like you said, let's keep having these conversations and sharing our stories. And you don't have to share it on Instagram or on the internet. You can find someone that you feel comfortable with to share. And I think it's also important to seek help if you find yourself that you're struggling and doesn't make you weak. I think that actually makes you strong to be able to own up to the fact that you need help, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Amen.
And keep talking. I'm still hoping and praying for my miracle babies to come, or rainbow babies to come. But in the meantime, I'm also acknowledging what has been lost, and also thankful that I'm here, alive and well, and able to try again. So let's keep having these conversations. It's been amazing talking to you today, Dr. Jess.
You too. Thank you so much for this and for all
Thank
that you do.
Yes, and thank you to Fertility Show Africa for having us and letting us have this conversation. Thank you.